presenter is Donald Windsor, and he at one time was a deputy county historian under Dale Storms and the author of Souvenirs of Yesteryear, which comes in 4 volumes, and it covers all of Chenango County and some of the adjoining areas adjoining the county. In the introduction to Volume 1, Don wrote, "I want to instill in my readers a sense of appreciation for historical remains. The Souvenirs of Yesteryear columns are a way of exploring Chenango County via photos and text." Don, you're on.
But some of us are going to be immortal. Those of us that put our writings in the public domain will last forever until humanity destroys all its libraries. But really think about it. I first was so aware of this. As soon as I retired, I started trying to resume my previous career as a student, as a biologist, and I spent a lot of time in the Cornell Mann Library. I'd get there around 9 o'clock in the morning. I'd come out at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and one day I came out about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, walking over to the parking lot. I thought, I spent 7 hours in this building communicating with the dead. I was doing research back in the early 1900s, and every one of the authors is dead. And they're talking to me. I spent 7 hours listening to these guys. And we're in that kind of a position, many of us here. We have put enough stuff in the literature so that long after we're dead, we'll be haunting these guys. This is like taking a voice. Hey, you, in the year 2050, I'm talking to you, buddy. This is how it was. Whether you like it or not. Those graves are silent for the people that don't write. But for those of us that write, we are going to live forever, at least until the vision of the libraries in Alexandria keep haunting me. I have a handout here which has 2 sides. The first one is editorial admonitions. This is a pent-up spirit from being active on the editorial committee for the Journal of Chenango County Historical Society for 7 issues. If you have any questions, please interrupt me. My voice doesn't hold out for an hour. And so I would like this to be a public discussion. I'm going to go through here trying to provoke discussion. Author, I was just talking about an author. Author is the root of the word authority. When you write something, you become an authority on that subject, whether you're right or wrong. There it is. It's like, okay, well, I wrote this and you're stuck with it. The other is publish. What do you mean by publish? Look at the word. Public and public domain. It's putting information in the public domain. If you've got information holed up in your cellar and you won't let anybody see it, that's not the public domain. Public domain means any person in the public can have access to it. You don't have to file the Freedom of Information Act. You don't have to go before a judge. You don't have to explain anybody. When you go to the library and sign with a book of War and Peace, nobody has the right to ask you, what are you, a commie? No, you just take the book and you get it. That's what public domain is. I worked in the public domain because I worked in research at research and development in the pharmaceutical industry. Patents. You cannot patent anything that is not in the public domain. So I worked with the legal part. This is what I did. I disrupted other people's patents. I could nullify a patent from a rival company by finding something in the scientific literature that's prior to the date of their patent, because that's in the public domain. How do we know that the guy getting the patent didn't just read this article, this chemical journal, and try to get a patent on it? So the patent is nullified. And every industrial company in the world has guys like me that do things like that. No questions? Okay, historical. Historical and historic get mixed up. Historical means anything old. I'm historical. These houses around here are historical. Historic means something that's old and famous. The courthouse is old and famous. Everybody knows the courthouse. But there's a context within this local area. There are 62 counties in New York, and they all have a courthouse. So they're all in a sense famous, but famous limited. Now I'd like to get into the big one. There's 3 stages to knowledge. The first stage is data, singular data. Data are anything you start with. It can be a photograph. That's a datum. Now suppose, this happens often in history. Someone comes in with a photograph, and you look at it, turn it over. There's no date, there's no identification of people in here, right? So that's just what it is. It speaks for itself. In order to produce information, you have to give it meaning. Information is data with meaning. If I show it to somebody else and say, do you know who these guys are? And they say, oh yeah, that's Phoebe, what's her name?
LeSueur.
Yeah, LeSueur. And the other one is Jezebel Thingamajiggy, and so forth. And they tell you the names of these people. They're giving meaning to this data. If you follow it up, there's a 1939 Plymouth in the background. There's no trees on the hills. This is pre-World War II. You know, you start to build up more information about it. But that's not knowledge. Knowledge is telling a story about it. With a photograph, you could have to tell the story of who Phoebe was, how they got this car, why there are no trees on that hill, everything like that. 39 degrees is a data. Someone, in order to get from one to the other, asked the snippy question, so what? If I come in here and I say 39 degrees, and you tell me, so what? And I tell you, 39 degrees is the densest point of water. Okay, that's now information. But so what? And I tell them, 39 degrees is the densest point of water, and therefore it sinks. And the density lessens, and under 39 degrees, the colder water goes to the top, and that's why water forms on a pond, on the top, not the bottom. In fact, that's a definition of a lake and a pond. A lake always has water on the bottom, that's 39 degrees. A pond doesn't. There's your story, there's your knowledge. You've created knowledge out of this. Most of what people give us is data. I have an illustration here. What time is it? Someone asks what time it is. They want to know what time it is. They don't want a blueprint for building a clock. We get this sometimes when we go looking for knowledge in a research center like a library or whatnot. And you go in and you say, I'd like to find out something about this and that subject. And they give you a pile of books, pile of papers. That to me is like buying, you want to sit down someplace, you're going to buy a chair, you buy it through online. box comes in, you open up the box and there's all these pieces in there. You got to put it together. When people give you a sherd of papers, that's a do-it-yourself project. That's not knowledge. This is what I define as a scrapbook. Scrapbooks are really great. They're full of information and mostly data. But what you have to remember is that doesn't help you much unless that's what you're looking for. If you're actually looking for it, if you say, I don't want anybody else's interpretation, I want to go back to the source. I'm going to do this all independently on my own because I don't think the other guys did a good job. That's a different story. But that's what I'm driving at. Sometimes I found as the editor, there are people whose mindset is such that they cannot get away, they cannot leap from information to knowledge. They're stuck with scrapbook. They just don't understand how you can go farther. What, no arguments yet? All right, on it goes. Everything can be summed up in one sentence. Everything. It's called a thesis statement. If you're writing an article and it's so complex, make any difference if I hold this? If it's so complex that you can't describe it in one sentence, you don't have an article. You've got a manuscript that's trying to become an article. There's an old story. I wrote a long article because I didn't have time to write a short one. Anybody can write a long article, you just start writing. And as long as you got paper and a sharp pen, you just keep going. But to write a short one, to be terse, sum it up in one sentence. This is what most researchers do. They start with a thesis sentence. If you got several thesis sentences, you got 3 thesis sentences, you got 3 articles. Remember, the whole idea of writing is communication, not to fill up space in a book. Well, maybe it is sometimes. You can fluff it up with photographs, it's easier. But try to get one sentence. If you don't start with one sentence, try to eventually reach to one sentence. Which brings into another trick here that I learned. Most researchers learn this when they're first getting into research, is don't do all your research and get it all finished and then write it up, because you'll never finish it. It just becomes impossible. You write and you do research at the same time, and I'm a great advocate that if you're thinking of writing an article, say on hemlock trees, you start writing on hemlock trees. You must know something about the subject or you wouldn't even think of writing about it. So you write what you know and what you would like the article to be. And then you do some research. And what you find out, doing it this way, is your research deals with the subject matter you're going to use in the write-up. You're trying to produce knowledge. You're not trying to just pile up words. So, and it's very easy when you're doing research to get interested in all kinds of sidetracks. It's like if you're just driving on a Sunday drive type thing and you're going down this road, you see something here that's interesting, you go down that road, then you see something over here, you go over there, and you go over there, and you come to the end, and what have you accomplished? You've seen all these things, and they've taken up a lot of time to burn gas. So in research, you want to get to the point. In an industry research, we had to write, under Procter & Gamble, we had to write bi-weeklies. Every 2 weeks, you had a report. If you turned in a bi-weekly that didn't say anything, you went down to the bottom 10%. This is a situation where the bottom 10% gets scraped off every year. You had to write, because if you can't sum up 2 weeks worth of research in 1 page, this was another Procter & Gamble heritage. One page, everything has to be one page. Every memo has to be one page. If you can't sum it up, then you don't know what you're doing. So you have to write while you're doing research. And if your research is taking you in a strange direction or it's nullifying itself because it contradicts the thesis statement, then you have to rethink what you're doing in the first place. No questions? She's all set up to do a group discussion here.
I don't know if it's a question, but it's a comment.
Yes.
If you're doing research, well, before you do the research, you've got something you think you might be interested in for whatever reason. I find that before I can do the research part, or do the writing part, I guess I should say, I have to do the research to find out if there's enough historical stuff out there to make it possible to really pull together a research article about it.
You're doing the two at the same time.
Well, am I? I don't know. I mean, I'm some things that just, the history has destroyed so much of it, there's just not enough left to come together and be an article. At least that's my opinion of the subject. And there are things that I'd love to write on, but I don't think I can find enough to illustrate what.
Well, you actually were writing before you did the research because you were thinking about it. You're thinking, I'm going to write about this barn, history of this barn, right? And then you wonder, where do I go? Is there any information on this barn? And so you're really doing this. And then when you actually go out and find that there's no information, you quit. If you're suddenly surprised that, wow, look at all this, which is usually the case, then you go ahead. But you go ahead as far as you can. For example, if you said this barn was built in the 1890s, and then you go do some research and you find out, no, this barn was built in the early 1900s, you're changing your story. You don't want to find this out at the very end of your research because the rest of the research would be based on a false premise. You want to, there's two kinds of problem solving. Algorithmic, which is basically follow the recipe, and heuristic. In heuristic, there's no correct answer. For example, how many people are in the United States at this moment? You can't answer that because somebody's always being born, somebody's always dying. You have to compress the research, the solution space. If you ask somebody, how much do you want for that car? And he says, well, I haven't even thought about selling it, but I'm interested in selling it. How much is it? But he says, well, I don't know. So you can ask an absurd question. Is it $1? Is it $10? Is it $100? $1,000? $10,000? How much? Well, it's more like $10,000. Okay, then you've narrowed the solution space. It's not $1 million, and it's not under 10,000. And that's what you do reading and doing history research.
Well, to go back to your barn example, suppose you're in the future and the barns are gone, and you want to write an article about what the barns look like. What are you going to do?
You have to quit. I wanted to write
that's my point.
I wanted to write about Spee's Spa down in McDonough.
Spee's Spa.
That was right on the McDonough's, Smithville line.
Yep.
And I really wanted to write about that because Greg Owens had done quite a bit of work down there. I had the Sampson.
Yes. Ray
Sampson. Ray Sampson was a great guy, and we worked together on a lot of stuff. And he was so excited about this that anybody would come in here and look at all this stuff. And so I had everything nailed down to write a good article about that with Ray. And I wanted to find out what the barn looked like, or the spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't find anything on it. So the article never came to fruition. I mean, if there's nothing on it and that's what you want to do, you're just spinning your wheels. you have to be pragmatic about it. There's only so much time. You have to say, and my time is 1 hour. If I go in a library and I can't find anything in 1 hour, that's it. There may be something there hidden away, but that's the end of my, I do have a short attention span, I admit, but 1 hour is all I'm going to devote to, this is called exploratory research, feasibility research. Is the project actually feasible? Is there any chance of bringing this thing to fruition? If there isn't, this is a pickup from industrial research. In an industry, you can't do what they do in academia, where some guy fiddles around for years and years, decade after decade. In research, you better come up with something or you're out. And so that's what it should be. Where was I here? Thesis Statement, any other question? Did that answer your question?
Don, you're talking about Speed Spot. Did you not write the article because you couldn't find a picture of it, or?
I wanted to know what the building looked like. I wrote 3 articles on it.
Okay.
You know, if the article I have in mind, this is why you do write while you're doing. The article I had in mind, I actually thought about a book. I was going to do a book with Greg Owens. But the cover of the book would be this spa. And if we had an old picture, even if it wouldn't work as many of these old pictures, you couldn't reproduce them anyway on a book. I'd draw one, put it on there, but we couldn't find one. But I did get 3 articles on that.
I have advertisements for the place, which I used in one article I wrote because I couldn't find a picture. So I used an old newspaper article promoting Speed Spot, and I thought maybe, you know, that was better than nothing, because that's all I had.
Well, maybe if you put that in the public domain, I would have found it.
It is in the public domain.
Oh, I
That's
didn't know
where I
about
got
it.
it from, yeah.
Okay, very good. That's good. That's good. That's
So that
where
works.
let me explain how publications work, because Sharon got into this right at the beginning of her talk. She says the work doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be published. If you wait for perfection, you may never get it published.
Right.
Well, back when the historian's office was in the basement here, I would spend a lot of time when I was doing my newspaper column, a lot of time down there. I used to hang out there, and people come and go. And there were a lot of people I would see. There was one guy working on Revolutionary War. He had a card file. He had all these books. He had enormous stuff. And he would go around the country looking for soldiers' graves in Wisconsin and what the hell not. And he would find this stuff, and I kept asking him, I says, why don't you write this up? Look at all you've got. And he says, well, I'm not finished yet. Well, he's dead.
That's Nelson? Was that Nelson?
No. Nelson did write stuff.
Yeah.
He did publish a lot of stuff. This guy, I can't think of his name. I remember once our hiking club parked in front of his road in the town of Greene.
I'm trying to think of his name. I know who you mean.
Yeah.
I know who you mean.
I noticed,
I know who you mean.
yeah, our cars, we had like 10 cars parked on the highway where he lives. And we came back from our hike and he was really mad because we muddied up all his highways. It's not your highway. And, you know, but I figured I better humor this guy. He's really mad.
Richter.
Oh,
Richter.
yes.
I don't remember his first name, but Richter.
Bob Richter.
Bob Richter,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I figured, gee, this guy's really steamed up. I don't know. So we got all the hikers, got our cars out of there. I says, give us a couple rakes and we'll rake this thing. He gave us some rakes and we raked this whole thing up and fixed him up. He was very nice. He went back to his work. Is he dead?
No, I
No,
don't think so.
last I heard.
Did he ever publish it?
Yes, he published a book about the soldiers.
Good.
It's
Good.
inaccurate, but it's.
Now he can die.
Now he'll never die. It's published.
It's published.
Right, he'll never know.
Okay. Anything else? What was that here? Articles are packaged, oh, I did say it. Title tells what the article is about. Here we go. People turn in cutesy titles.
Oh, yeah, I learned not to do that because it's too hard to find them later.
The title should answer the question. I'm going to use Henry's article. Henry wrote a great article for the Journal, but for some reason, he started out, this is the first article he sent to the Journal. I was so happy he wrote something because this guy knows so much, but it's not in the public domain. If it's not in the public domain, it really doesn't exist. And so he sends this article in, this about growing up on a farm in Smyrna, and it comes in with a title like, What Agriculture Means to Me. And I figured, what does this mean?
Exactly.
I mean, you look at that, you figure, who cares?
You know how that came about, though? You know how that came about?
No.
John Antonowitz asked me that question and asked me to write in response to it.
Oh.
That's where it came from.
That's
And
what
everybody
came.
used it.
So I didn't want to lose Henry by sending it back and say, come up with a title that tells me. So I think what I did was,
Yeah, that was his email to me. He asked me to write this article. But if you'd contacted me, I would have said, well, geez, John made me do it.
There's a title for you.
I'd be
John
happy
made
to
me
change
do it.
the title. I'm not
See,
letting
because-
do it.
the way publications and public domain works, the citation for the literature is separate from the article itself. And so decisions are made on the basis of the citation. Citation is the author. All the things you need to go in a library and get this particular document. It's the author, all of them. Preferably, if you've got space, you put down their first name, not this initial stuff. The use of initials is depriving people of needed information. But then comes the title. Author, title, then comes the source. The source is where is this published. If it's published in the Journal of Chenango County Historical Society, you write that up. And you write the year in which it's published, and you write the pages. This is the same format you use for the back of when you're citing in the back of your endnotes, we call it. Footnotes are at the bottom of the page, endnotes at the end. And you do that, and then you give the pages, and you give the first page and the last page. Because if you have to get an interlibrary loan, you want to know, am I asking for 100 pages of an article, or am I asking for 10? You can learn from that. So that's what you have to do, which is a good way for me to get into, how did I do that? A good way to get into the
First
next
paragraph.
segment. Well, let me finish. What?
First paragraph.
First paragraph. The first paragraph should have the punchline. The punchline is a snazzy way of stating the thesis statement. Thesis statement may be awkward. Punchline is first. Why is it first? Because everything that's written in a scholarly way, and that's what I'm a scholar. In a scholarly way is the headline, the first paragraph, the rest of the article. If you're reading the New York Times, which I do, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post are set up, Los Angeles Times, set up in such a way that you can't possibly read everything in every day's newspaper. There's too much of it, especially the Sunday edition. So, here's how you read the New York Times. You read the headline. If the headline interests you, you go to the first paragraph. If the paragraph interests you, you read the rest of it. If you go to the headline that doesn't interest you, flip over to the next one. That's it. That's how you get through it on one day. I give my New York Times to Van here, and because he can't get them delivered out in the boondocks of Preston. But I try to get them out there in one day, and sometimes it takes 2 weeks because there's so much good information. But anyway, you read the headline, and if that doesn't interest you, you're off. You read the headline, it does interest you, you read the first paragraph. The first paragraph should tell you what the rest of it is about. It tells you what it's about, and the rest of the stuff is to fill in the blanks. This is like giving you the skeleton of a body, and the rest of it is thrown on the muscles and the organs and all that. So that's the way a lot of stuff is set up. That's the way a research article is. People think that research articles have to be read from the beginning to the end. That's wrong. You read research articles from the back to the front. I subscribe to several science journals, and I always start at the back. The reason you start at the back is what I'm going to get into now. There's a concept called Citation Networks. I don't have a black one. Citation networks can be thought of the way transportation networks are. First transportation networks were rivers, streams. They could be written on a map, and you can see. If you're starting out here at White Store and going down the river, there's all these nodes. These are places like settlements, such as Mount Upton and Bainbridge and Afton. Those are nodes. The connections to a node are considered arcs. This is the part of the mathematical graph theory. If you have 100 arcs in a particular, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. After the river, it was the roads, turnpikes. The turnpikes had the same thing. These were nodes, namely stop points, toll gates and whatnot, off to wherever they were going. They did not follow a straight line like interstates because they didn't have eminent domain. They used to have to work it out with landowners and everything else. They were horses driving the land, a lot of walking. The turnpikes have two names. The destination, if you're going that way was the Cayuga Turnpike, this way was the Catskill Turnpike, all of that. Oxford was a nexus where many of these came together. This is a big important node. Railroads follow the same node. I grew up in Chicago, and we had railroads every 4 blocks. It was a different railroad. They were all going down to the big yards in the city. It was a big nexus for east and west. Airplanes follow this way. Atlanta is a big thing. Last time I went down to Florida, we went to Detroit first. That doesn't make much sense. But that's the way the corridors were set up. Well, here's how information is transferred as a packet through a citation network. If I write an article in 1990 and I cite Smith's History of Chenango County, 1880, I'm writing it 10 years later. I cite that book. I'm up here, the book is down here. There's an arc connecting us. That's the beginning of a citation network. Smith, on the other hand, has a lot of footnotes. And those footnotes connect something like surveys by DeWitt Clinton and war plans and everything else. He spells them out. They cite other things, like for instance, the war plan, the Sullivan campaign or whatever. That's down there, so there's 3 nodes down here. If somebody writes another paper citing me, that's 4 nodes. But citing my paper, I may have 5 or 10. Gail Marion is a very prolific writer. Her typical article has about 25 references. So every node in the citation network that Gail writes has 25 other connections. Now, if I'm writing an article and I cite something by Cooper, James Fenimore Cooper, okay, I cite him and I cite, say, Tom Gray, then these two, through my paper, are bibliographically connected. And the whole thing builds a nexus like atoms build crystals. And they look that way. And when searching through massive amounts of information, what you want to do is get those nodes that have the greatest activity. In other words, if we compared articles written in our journal, how many of those articles cited Smith? Smith's History of the County may be the most cited article in our journal. If that's the case, then that's something you ought to be familiar with. And anybody citing the work of Smith should cite the pages. That's about 780 pages or something, big thick book. And don't make the reader have to go through the book trying to mind read you as to what page your particular citation means. Which brings us to the concept of audit trails. English teachers tend to, are so glad that their students write term papers, or I don't know what they call them anymore. We used to call them term papers. They write something and they have a bibliography at the back. There's no audit trail between what they're saying and back. It's good enough to get school kids just to do that. But if up here in the adult world, it's not fair to the reader. If you say, for example, that this town was founded in 1806, you put your reference number right up here, reference 6. You go back to reference 6, you know, the reader knows where you got that date from. Without putting the audit trail between, it's hard to do this without having a diagram, but without actually putting that audit trail back in there, you don't know, especially if you're, because the reader may look at this and say, this town wasn't founded in 1806, it was founded in 1807. They both could be right, because in order to do anything to change a town boundary or break it up into a different town, has to go through the legislature in Albany. That's 2 houses of the legislature and the governor's signature. It's a big deal. It was even a bigger deal in the old days when they had to either walk or drive a horse or a carriage or something to go to Albany and back. And so you're going to do this. They sometimes approved it in November of 1806 with the idea that it was effective in February of 1807. So the question is, this has to do with Pharsalia and Plymouth and some of those in that area. They were, is yours not Scenic?
Preston
Scenic
too.
was that one. And which date are you going to choose? Well, this is like trying to choose when would a building built. You can't build most buildings in 1 year unless you start on January 1st and hustle. You have to, when is a building built? It's built between this, when they started, or was it when the first blueprints were made? There's no good way. So you have to communicate to the reader what criteria you're using to set all these dates. Any questions? Is this clear? The whole idea of citation networks changes what people think about as an article. In the scholarly world, the purpose of an article is to generate more articles, because the work is never done. You're just filling in as Newton said, we stand on the shoulders of giants. This is what he meant. We stand on the literature that gives us the credence to go forward. We can't read everything from the beginning. You don't start somebody's biography by, his great-great-great-grandparents were Adam and Eve. I mean, you start with some kind of a known starting point. And you have to do that when you're dealing with dates and anything else. But that's why we try to communicate as much information as possible. There's something that every town historian should have, is the literature that's produced in Albany, the official literature that defines when your town was created. Do you have that? You probably do.
Yeah, because a former historian had it.
There's a publication with the unlikely title of Tree Talks, which is a genealogy type thing, and it's got pictures in there of the history of all these counties, Chenango County, Waterloo. It's got these pictures because the towns in Chenango County listed long before 1798 when the county was founded. Some of these, before 1798, we were Herkimer County and Tioga. And before that it was Montgomery, and then it was Tryon, and all of that. So some of these towns are much earlier as they go through. Any questions? Okay. I'll conclude by saying that the best time to record history is while it's happening. There was a lot of young people the other day when we had a ceremony out here, and I was really delighted to see it. You don't have to be an old person to be interested in history. The best time to record it is while it's happening, while you can check things out. If you don't agree with the picture in the paper, you can go over there and take your own picture. It's good, but the best time to interpret history is 50 years later. Why did I decide on 50 years? 2 generations. A generation is 25 years. Does everyone know why? It's twice the age of puberty. A wild population of humans had a life expectancy of 25 years. Puberty, they made it at 12 or 13 before all these estrogens and the pesticides start speeding things up. And they died after 25. A few of them lived to be 50, which was considered old, and then older than that. But that's why it is. Anyway, I picked this up because I watch Morning Joe every morning that I possibly can, and they have a lot of historians on there, and these guys usually say 50. 50 is old enough so that you can interpret the effects of whatever event you're writing about, and yet it's young. It's old enough to look back. It's young enough so that you can actually find people that are alive when this happened, and you can dig into it. As not, if you waited any longer than 50, everybody's going to be dead. Okay, I'd like to get to this other one when I have time here. I wrote an article in the last issue of the Journal of Chenango County Historical Society. I wrote this article to provoke.
You did.
I provoked. Okay. I did provoke Chris. I provoked her because I didn't cite the book that Chris and Peg were talking about. And that was an omission on my part. I should have. Why didn't I cite your book? I'll tell you why. I found that your books are really great when I would take care of my wife, take her to a doctor, especially a doctor in Cooperstown. I would carry this book around because when you go to see a doctor, it's wait. And why waste your time reading magazines you don't care about? I would take your book, and no matter when they interrupted me, it wouldn't matter because it's just one short article after another short article. And the reason I didn't cite it here is I forgot about it. It was in the trunk of my car. Because I didn't want to leave home without it. But I should have put it in here. It, to me, was a scrapbook. It was one short memory after another. And so it was what we call, and we were talking about this on a publication committee for the last year or two, about anecdotal. There's scholarly writing and there's anecdotal writing. Anecdotal writing is what you've got here. People give you information. You don't know if it's correct or not. There's no fact checking. See, scholarly writing was something invented in the Middle Ages to counter fake news. There was more fake news in the old days than there are now because nothing was written down. It was just one rumor after another. And so scholars, namely monks, figured out that there are several ways if we do this, we can eliminate the fake news and get to what really counts. So that's what we did. And I should have put it in here with the scrapbooks. We were thinking,
I'd just like to make a comment about this anecdotal and scholarly. What they've collected is a lot of first-hand accounts by the people who experienced what they're recounting. I don't
Right,
think it gets any
eyewitnesses.
better than that. But it sounds like you're demeaning the idea of anecdotal. Maybe you didn't intend that, but it sounds that way to me. Anecdotal histories, which
well,
your
people
oral
make
history, which Sharon was talking about, that would fall into the same category. I think those are very valuable, and at least as valuable as the academic type of history you're talking about.
well, I'm the guy that forgets how old my kids are. And I should know. People forget various things. If I ask somebody, when was this gas station here, I might get an answer. But if they say, this gas station was taken down in 1934, I remember that because there was a big fire across the street. And then I have a date where I can corroborate it. A lot of anecdotal information you have to corroborate. Newspapers are full of errors. Why are they full of errors? They're full of errors because the reporters don't have time to proofread, which is obvious. They have to make a deadline. They have to make a deadline. Newspapers that are proofread, like the New York Times, they have an assembly line where the proofreaders proofread almost as the stuff is coming out. And they have a lot of technology to be able to proofread. But what they're
So
hard,
somebody might forget the date that the barn burned, but it's forever etched in their mind what that did to their family and their economics and so on, and they can recount that very clearly. I don't think that's going to be
Well,
affected by time.
it is, because some of these articles, you're not sure about the details. Where do people actually live? You're looking at some of the built-in misinformation that's part of our society. For example, up until just recently, a woman had no first name. It was always the first name of her husband. And I have two daughters. I didn't raise these girls to take somebody else's name. I didn't name them that last name. You know, they have a name too. So when somebody writes an article and sends it in, Joshua and Mrs. Smith, I figure, no, what's this lady's name? I try to get through that. If they say they lived in, I've lived in Chenango County all my life, what town? I lived in town Smithville all my life, where? You just have to keep, it needs a certain amount of editorial pushback.
But that's different. Then you're talking about editing what somebody is providing from their own experience. And I don't argue with that.
I'm talking about anecdote. There were eyewitnesses, but you know, you're a lawyer.
Well, some are more accurate than others, but I mean, even in a courtroom, the testimony of a witness is going to
Yeah, they would be.
prevail over something you're going to find in a book.
They would be. But in scholarly work, we would like to have some corroboration. When you read a scholarly journal and you see at the end there's no references, that's a good indication that this article isn't worth reading. And if you read a court judge's ruling and he didn't cite any law, wouldn't you wonder about
Yeah,
it?
but I could cite a diary of Mrs. Helen Smith, forget the Mrs. Helen Smith's diary, and that's her firsthand account of her lived experience.
Right, but if your paper
In a
is,
diary, even more, she's recording that when the events happen, which is another aspect of testimony, is how close is the account to the actual occurrence of the event. So,
that's correct. But if you're writing the article citing Mrs. Smith's diary,
no, Helen,
you're a secondhand,
Helen Smith.
Comes back to bite you.
no,
Go
you're
ahead.
secondhand, and the points he made attest to the complexity of some of this stuff. But what they're doing is they're getting something from somebody. I don't know, did you even correct the language? If they misspelled something?
Oh, absolutely, I corrected misspellings.
Okay,
Well, Chris said some people had the story, but they couldn't write. And so they really had to help that person get their story out. So
Right.
I think it varied from case to case, which
It did.
I think is totally appropriate.
yeah. But before they had widespread dictionaries, they had many different ways which were all
Right.
legitimate.
Right.
And so when I cite, sometimes I reprint in our journal, the one about King Settlement Road. We didn't have much, King Settlement itself. We don't have much information on this spot, but it's near and dear to me because it's next to Wapanaka, one of my favorite state forests. So I found something written and I wanted to reprint it. We reprinted it, but we kept the misspellings in there because they are part of the history. This is what the word used to be spelled like. Some of the language used to be that way.
Transcribed rather than
And
writing
so,
correctly.
hmm?
You transcribed it rather than
Yeah,
writing it
transcribed it instead of, and it's very hard to get anybody to do that. Every time I got somebody to transcribe it, because they type fast, they keep correcting things. And so I have to go back and uncorrect stuff. You know, if somebody says, I'm gonna, rather than I'm going to, I notice in the newspaper they're using that. Gonna has become eventually a new word in our language. I'm gonna do something. But yeah, you're transcribing rather than writing, and that has to be correct. But we wanted to get an anecdotal journal as opposed to scholarship, because anecdotal work does not get all the editorial pushback that it needs. So that was the
Well, you're
reason.
taking care of that, so we're all set.
Now, getting back to this, I'm running out of time. Getting back to this, this is the chart. This is my evaluation. It's on the other side of your handout. My evaluation of the 21 towns in Chenango County. Oh, I had 20, I've got the city of Norwich included. And I ranked them. And the conclusion is about half of our towns have basic or better histories. The other half are inadequate or woeful. Now, if you're looking for a research project, you don't want to jump in where everybody else is. You always want to look for something that nobody else is doing. That's where the opportunity lies. It's like you buy stock when nobody wants it, you sell it when everybody does. If you're doing research, you're looking. We really need these lower towns here. The ones I've got 3 are woeful. Smithville is one of them. Now, Ellison Owens, is she still a historian?
Yes.
She, several years, maybe 5 years ago, she took me on a guided tour of Smithville. It was spectacular. she knew all this stuff, I learned so much. And I told her, why don't you write this up? She says, good idea. And it would make a good idea, and she knows a heck of a lot. So she's someone that I was hoping she would show up today, that really does it. I wish I could have had like a video of her trip to just see all these places. Really spectacular. Norwich has no history, the town, because of fire. That when the town historians live at home, because they keep all their books and everything, that all the books were wiped out. I think Plymouth may have had the same trouble in the past. But look at them here. Smithfield, Norwich, Journal.
Can you explain the chart here for us?
Yeah, I want to know what the appraisals, how you come to the appraisals.
Oh, this is
What's
how,
the meaning of the appraisals?
yeah, it's in the book here. I started out by saying, this was my original premise. Every town in the county of Chenango should have a history written about it. One book. I mean, if you're looking for the history of any town, you should be able to start, you should be able to find it in less than a day. If you want a history of the city of Norwich, we have a book written by Dale Storms, The History of Norwich. Pretty good. It doesn't give the complete history, but it gets you started of the current history. So I went through and I tried to see, could I find one book? Books are great because they tell a story, usually, not always. And if I, what did I do? I listed in here, most of the documents cited in this table, so plenty of historical information is available in both published and unpublished records. I favored books because they usually are more carefully thought out and usually tell a story. History is a story of something over a time span. There are people in this audience that don't agree with this.
What?
Chris,
I agree.
you agree?
Yes.
Oh. Too bad.
Well, after I did my work for today's program, then I read, and was calling something history, then I read your quote and I thought, well, wait a minute, I think I'm wrong.
Yeah, what,
You mean history versus historical?
yeah,
Or,
yeah, history, and history is a story. You know, so scrapbooks I have in here. Scrapbooks are great, but they're not a story. If somebody gives you a scrapbook, you may have to go through page by page, picture by picture, look at it all and come up with some kind of a story, which may be wrong. The person who put the scrapbook together would be the ideal one for writing it. There are many books that started, that I listed here. McDonough, there's a book in there by a Tuttle.
Oh,
Helen Reed Tuttle.
yes.
It's a terrific book, but it's not a book. It's a manuscript, double-spaced, typewritten, banged out book. It's got a lot of cross-outs and scribbles, change this, do that. So it's not finished. It's just a manuscript. That, if we could ever have the resources, would be good to just reprint, just take pictures of it and reprint it as a book on the history of McDonough. And there are other ones. There's one on Smyrna. Anybody here from Smyrna? Oh, you're from Smyrna. Right, you grew up there.
That's right.
Smyrna's got a good history book, as does Sherburne. But Sherburne has got a lot of history.
S-M-Y.
But there's a recent one, and I forget the name. I think it starts with R. Some woman wrote it. It's a manuscript, and it's not published. That's another one that should be reprinted. Because the definition of history is a story. You know, people say, I see this sometimes, they're tearing a building down like this historic, where was it, down the street here, this big warehouse on the canal, where the wall fell down. And they were turning that on, people saying, a piece of our history is missing. No, it isn't. This historic building is missing. History is a story. What's missing is the fact that nobody wrote an article about this building. There was quite a, it had a 40-foot long dock, it says, someplace. That can be documented. Well, 40 foot, Dale and I and Dave Drucker went over there, and we paced it off, and 40 feet over would take it into the sidewalk along State Street. And yet State Street, any street named State Street is usually covered up the canal along, it's called State Street because the state covered it up. And the state didn't want to get away without getting credit for it, so they named it State Street.
The state owned the land before.
Yeah.
It was state land.
So anyway, if the 40-foot dock was there, the canal was over here. You know, well, maybe the 40-foot dock wasn't 40 feet.
Maybe
There's
it
no
wasn't
pictures
perpendicular
of
to
it
the
or
building.
anything to find out. Huh?
Are you talking about being perpendicular to the building or along the side of the building?
I don't know.
40-foot dock.
Well, we assume that it's from the front of the building directly east.
Why? Why wouldn't it be going north or south to the north?
Because this is where the width of the length of,
Widest part of the building was north-south.
yeah, you could.
So the dock would be along the canal, which went parallel to the building.
It could be. Yeah, I don't know. We just assumed that.
I would too.
Just, I assumed, because I didn't agree with Dale or Dave, I thought it was named State Street because it was. I look at it the way it curves, and it goes over to Lee Avenue, and goes underneath the railroad. There's a little puddle of canal water left there, and on Bowman Avenue. I don't know, but anyway, any other comments? Because I'm out of time. And Tom Gray is waiting to get up here.